Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on understanding your gender pay gap. We're very lucky to have Chloe Schombrode, who is the Gender Equality Director for Business and Community, with us today. My name is Tara Hutton. I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Manager at the Government Equalities Office. Just some housekeeping. All attendees are muted in the interest of keeping to time, but if we have time at the end, we will try and answer some of your questions. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Chloe.
Hello, welcome everyone. We are very happy to be presenting this presentation today. I am really passionate about gender pay gap reporting, and I'm just going to run you through what we're going to be discussing today. So first of all, we will briefly run you through the legislative requirements. When do you have to publish? What do you have to publish? And then we will also introduce you to the gender pay gap reporting and its main causes. The topic of today is, where does your pay gap come from? Because each of you as employers will have different reasons for your pay gap, and we want to explore what reasons you can, what you can influence, and how you can find out more about the factors that affect your pay gap. So it will be very practical. We will look at some key questions that you should be asking yourselves to uncover the causes of your pay gap, and we really hope that this will help you write a really good contextual narrative when you publish your figures, because it's only compulsory to publish your figures, but we really hope that you're going to go beyond that and explain to your employees and the general public why you have a pay gap, and maybe also what you are doing to address it. In other webinars, we will be looking more in depth at the actions you can take. This webinar will focus mostly on the causes of the pay gap. So to tell you a bit more about us, we are a business in the community. We were formed in 1982, and we are the largest responsible business network in the UK, with over 35 years of experience now working with business to help them be more responsible and improve their diversity and inclusion. And the reason why we're doing this is because people who feel included at work are more innovative, they're more energized, they're more engaged, and we want everyone to be able to realize their potential. So we have a responsible business map to guide members on our journey. And as you can see, diversity and inclusion is part of the bigger agenda, and gender equality is very much at the heart of this. We run a series of campaigns. Gender is one of them. We also work around employment, age, race, and well-being. And as I say, our goal is really to help employees realize their potential and contribute their best to the workplace. So we've got a network of over 750 employers. We cover 1 in 6 employees in the UK, and we really are trying to share our expertise with others. And if you want more information, you can contact us, and there will be some details at the end. So let's get started now. Tara, would you mind telling us a bit more about the gender pay gap and giving us a short introduction?
Absolutely, Chloe. I think, first of all, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to Government Equalities Office. We are probably best known for introducing groundbreaking legislation in March of this year to, I guess, aid employers to report their gender pay gap. We had unprecedented levels of compliance with the new legislation. So we had 94% compliance at deadline, and we were able to announce 100% compliance by the 1st of August, which I think really illustrates the commitment that UK businesses are showing to this agenda, which I think is really very positive. To move back a step, sorry, we're having a slight issue with the slides here. To move back a step, Government Equalities Office, we're lucky enough to be led by 3 women who are also very passionate about this agenda. You can see on the screen here. And our work on the mandatory gender pay gap reporting is only one part of our wider equalities agenda, which I won't go into here, but you can have, there's some information on the screen. So we'll jump to what is the gender pay gap. It's important really to stress that gender pay gap and equal pay are very different things, even though some media coverage would suggest otherwise. unequal pay is illegal, and it has been for 45 years. So to pay an individual different amounts for the same job or equivalent work, that's what equal pay is.
So maybe, Tara, if we can give an example. So often we try to illustrate it by saying, if you take one woman and one man and both of them have the same job, let's say they are managers in a bank, paying the woman less because of her gender would be unequal pay if they have the same, if they're doing the same work or work of equal value. The gender pay gap is not looking at two individuals who are doing the same job. It's looking at all the individuals, the employees in the organization. And it's looking at people who are doing jobs in secretarial roles up to the CEO. And it's taking all these people together and looking at the differences between men overall and women overall. So maybe that gives an example of the differences. And unequal pay can obviously contribute to the gender pay gap, but even if you don't have unequal pay problems and you are paying women and men, as you should, the same amount, you could still have a gender pay gap.
Thank you, Chloe. I think that makes it quite relatable. And just on gender pay, the gender pay gap itself is the difference between the average earnings of men and women, and that's expressed relative to men's earnings. So, for example, if a company has a gender pay gap of 15%, it means that women earn 15% less on average than men per hour in that company. So the average is the key there, and the calculations that you must use to determine your gender pay gap are what give you that average. So there are a series of figures that employers have to report, including the mean and median, and all of this data will give you different levels of insight into your gender pay gap. As government, we're encouraging employers to develop an action plan to improve your gender pay gap. So our webinar today, what we want to do is give you information on where you should look for more insight.
Yes, absolutely. And the figures you can see on the screen are obviously compulsory, but we are really encouraging employers at Business in the Community to be even more transparent and also be more curious about the pay gap. I think for a lot of employers, calculating the pay gap has given them the sort of awareness that there is a problem in the organization, and we want to encourage them to ask themselves even more questions about why do they have a pay gap, where does the pay gap come from, what is specific to their business, because all the answers to those questions that we will be showing you later will inform your narrative and will help you to understand your pay gap, but also explain it to your workforce and potentially to your future employees and the public and women in the public who may want to work for your organization.
So why should you as an employer take action to close the gender pay gap? Well, there's various reasons on the screen here, but closing the gender pay gap isn't only the right thing to do, it does have clear business benefits. Studies show that companies with diverse boards have higher and more sustained profitability, and ethical investors are now looking at gender diversity as part of their portfolio. But also from the employee side, Business and Community have some interesting findings from a survey they carried out. Chloe, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. We conducted a survey about 2 years ago asking employees what they thought about the gender pay gap, because there were a lot of surveys around employers, but not very much around employees. And the research was fascinating. 92% of the participants, and we surveyed over 1,000 people, said they would use this information when choosing between two employers. And actually, half of the respondents, and this was male and female, would favor the company either with the smallest pay gap or the company that is most proactive in closing it. So I think it's not just about the figures, it's also about what the organization is doing to close it. And I think that's why explaining the pay gap and putting in place an action plan is so key. And sharing what you're doing with your employees is very, very important. So there is clearly a lot of evidence to say that it's really important to look at the pay gap and understand it and obviously close it.
Thanks, Chloe. And that leads nicely into the reasons for the gender pay gap. What causes the gender pay gap? And we'll look at some of the reasons here that are on a national level. Some of or all of these will exist within your organization and will have relevance for you. I guess with some of the drivers, there are broader societal factors at play, such as gender stereotypes, culture and discrimination. And individual businesses can't solve these alone, and there are government initiatives at work to improve the pipeline, so younger people coming into certain occupations, for example. But there are areas where businesses can take action. There are areas where businesses can do better, and the information that we will give you today will hopefully allow you to identify those areas. By far, the largest driver of the gender pay gap is family care and responsibilities, and that's at 40%. You can see on the screen. So taking time out of work to care for your family, whether it's children earlier in your career or whether it's parents or relatives later, this has a detrimental impact on earnings. There's lots of studies out there that will show this. Really, it's due to leaving work or working part-time, removes you from the labour market and has an impact on your career progression. So I guess there's also a level of culture at play as well. So recent research from the Government Equalities Office wage programme suggests that many couples don't actually have the conversation around who's going to undertake the majority of the care and responsibilities. It's assumed that it will be the woman. And I guess the big question to ask really is why? Why is it assumed that it will be the woman? And I think, and Chloe, you might agree with me, the impact on career progression most certainly forms part of this answer. I think men recognise that taking time out to care and responsibilities, for family responsibilities, or even asking for flexible working for this will have an impact on their career. And I guess it's generally felt that only one partner should take that hit. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who may be familiar with our research, we published recently a report called Equalities, where we surveyed over 10,000 employees, men and women, and we found that men want to care more for their children, but they're not necessarily empowered to by their employers because of the culture, etc. And what I find so fascinating about this graph is on the screen is there is so much that employers can do. When you look at caring and enabling men to take a more prominent role in caring and spending more time at home so that women can progress at work, that's definitely something that employers can influence through enhanced shared parental leave, flexible working, etc. But also looking at gender stereotypes and bias. There is a lot we can do to remove bias from our processes, our interviews, and we're going to be talking about this in more detail today. So let's move on to what are the questions you really need to ask yourself. Now that you've got quite a good understanding of the different causes for your gender pay gap, and it might be different. Let's say if you are a company working in the engineering sector, you may have fewer women coming to your organization in the first place, so you may want to look at attraction and recruitment. If you are, let's say, a legal firm, maybe you want to look at retention and progression and what you can do around that. So there are many different questions to you can ask yourself, and we'll be exploring some of them. I think the first question really, and we've made the difference between the distinction between equal pay and gender pay gap. The first thing you want to be asking yourself is, do you conduct equal pay audits or review? Because as I said, you can have a gender pay gap without having an equal pay, but if you do have an equal pay, that will definitely contribute to your gender pay gap, not to mention the fact that it's illegal. So an equal pay audit involves comparing the pay of men and women doing equal work in your organization, and it really helps identify any differences in pay between men and women doing equal work, but also the causes of this difference. And ultimately, it helps to eliminate, obviously, instances of unequal pay that cannot be justified. And I would say you can have many excuses or reasons to have a pay gap, but unequal pay should never be one of them. So looking at another question, Tara, can you tell us a bit more about the sector and the industry?
Thanks, Chloe. Absolutely. Just to say, some of you may have experienced a slight pause in the slides there. We just had a little technical issue with that, but we've resolved that now. So thank you for your patience. Yes, I guess before we jump into the more in-depth questions, we wanted to have ask you the question: do you know what the gender pay gap for your sector is? Obviously, you can't answer, but just do you know? Are you aware of what that is? And I think, in a more broader sense, these are the the pay gaps for the three different sectors. They represent the figures taken from the annual survey of hours and earnings, which is where the national gender pay gap figures come from. And I think overall, the gender pay gap in the private sector is considerably larger than the public sector. I guess there's lots of reasons for this. Employees in the public sector are protected by collective pay agreements and other similar contracts establishing pay and pay rules, I suppose. And also, importantly, transparency is a key feature of public and third sector pay systems, which may account for a smaller pay gap, really, overall. And these industry-specific figures that you can see here are the ones that you, the employers, reported for the first year of gender pay gap reporting. So were you right? Did you know what the figures were for your industry? And actually, you'll get the slides after the presentation. It would be good to use these figures in your narrative and in your action plan to benchmark yourself against your industry. So in every single industry, there's a pay gap which favours men. A breakdown of gender pay gaps for different sectors of the economy can be really useful in understanding how you compare with your sector, which we've already discussed.
Yes, absolutely, Tara. And I think a lot of employers have actually used the national average to benchmark themselves against something. But it's much more relevant to use a gender pay gap by industry. So let's say if you are in the finance and insurance industry, it's much better to use a 35.6% median gender pay gap as opposed to using the national average. That's a bit more honest as well. So we would really encourage you to use the figures in the presentation to do that. So there is a gender pay gap as well when we look at the different kinds of occupations. So we know that women tend to work in lower paying industries, but also roles. And what I would really like to encourage employers to do is to look at which roles do women work in. So if you break down your workforce by gender and what we call occupational group, which is very much role type, that can help you identify where women are in your organization. Are they mostly concentrated in administrative and secretarial roles? If so, what can you do to attract maybe more men? Or what can you do to attract more women in managerial roles and director and senior official roles? So it can be very useful to do this analysis to find out where women are in your business and if that is equally represented in different occupations. So after looking at the occupations in your business, something you can also do is, if you find that there are a lot of women working in secretarial roles, maybe, you may want to find out how to attract more men or more women in certain roles. So how do you prevent bias in recruitment? Have you got, at the moment, any kind of processes to remove bias? And I can give you a very quick example. For instance, if your job ads are using very male-dominated sort of words, or that could really have an impact. So we know some employers have used a sort of decoder, an app where they copy and paste the job ad and look at how gender biased the ad is, and that really is helpful to attract more men or more women to your organization. So I know of an organization who's done that, and by making the job ad a lot more neutral, because it was very male biased before, they've managed to increase the number of women applying by 40%. So it's very important to ask yourself, how are you recruiting? And how are you assessing candidates? So, for instance, what we often advise employers to do, and this is also a recommendation that the Government Equalities Office has done, is in what ways are you conducting your interviews? It's very important that you are asking the same questions to the candidates in the exact same order, and if possible, using a scale to rate the employees, because that helps to remove the bias in the interview. Just going back to the job ads, I mean, there was a study by Total Jobs that showed that 70,000 UK jobs ads had some kind of language that was biased towards male. So I really encourage you to do that. It's very easy to just use your job ad and see if it's biased, but also looking at how you assess candidates. And we know that when you ask about skills as opposed to a very traditional interview, it works much better when the future employees or would-be employees are allowed to show how they can demonstrate certain skills in the job.
Thank you, Chloe. I think the next three questions that we're going to look at very much influence each other. So we'll start with this one. What's your promotion rate for men and for women? And I mean, as we saw and discussed earlier, the lack of women making it to senior roles really is a driver of the gender pay gap. And I guess this is influenced and influenced by and influences labour market participation. So some key questions really you should be asking yourself to find out if women are progressing within your business. A good exercise would be to look at the employee journey, so from entry level, and compare between men and women at various points. So, after 5 years, after 10 years, where are they? Have they progressed? Look at attrition rates between male and female, and how many move to part-time work. Is there a marked point when women leave? Is it age? Is it family circumstances? Is it after they reach a certain level? And I guess how many of each gender progresses? How far do they progress? Is there a clear level where women get stuck? And I think you'll be able to find that out if you interrogate your data a little bit. And then maybe have a look at this in the context of working patterns again. Do women get stuck if and when they move to part-time employment? Even if that part-time employment is 4 days a week, does that have an impact on their progression? And I guess you could ask the question, does a female employee who has a baby progress at the same rate as a male employee who has a baby? And actually there's evidence out there to say that male employees who have families progress even more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely, Tara. And it's really interesting looking at part-time work in the UK. I mean, women, I think there are 41% of women working part-time compared to 11% of men. So the real question is part-time work valued in your organization, or are women working part-time less likely to get development opportunities, training opportunities? Do they go on a sort of lower track when they start working part-time? And I think it's really important that everyone has the opportunity to progress. And I know a lot of women who are very senior who have to work, in sort of who are underemployed or are not using their skills in the way that they could, because the part-time roles that are advertised are not necessarily senior matching their level. So I think it's really, really important to ask this question around part-time work. Is it valued in your organization? And if not, what can you do? Asking employees, I couldn't agree more. At Business in the Community, we support employers conducting focus groups. We also have a benchmark. The first part of the benchmark is free for employers to access, and that really, really helps understand where are women stuck in your organization, what levels. Is it at recruitment stage? Is it at different levels of seniority, and once you've got the data, you can really start working on it. So I think it's really important that employers are gathering data, whether it's quantitative, and this is looking at the different promotion rates, etc., but also asking employees is crucial, because that will give you a lot of insights and into the lived experiences of women and the stories, but also looking at what kind of women are progressing, because we call this intersectionality. It's almost looking at what groups of women may be more disadvantaged. And we know that, for instance, women from ethnic minority background and BAME women are often paid less than white women. So it's really important that you also think about women not as a uniform, unique group, but looking at what kind of women are having more disadvantage in your organization and what can you do to support them.
Thanks, Chloe. And I'll stress again, ask employees. You'll find out some information if you look at the historical wage data, for example. You'll find out that maybe part-time women aren't progressing through the salary bands. But also, if you find that women aren't going for promotion or aren't being successful at promotion, ask them, talk to them about their experiences. I think that will give you some ideas and some solutions to your problem. So I think we're running a series of webinars with business in the community, which will look at the actual actions you can take in these areas in much more detail, and we'll have some examples from employers. But looking at this at a broader level and asking yourself the question, how do you prevent bias in work allocation and in your promotion processes? And any information you've gathered in the previous question will help you inform this. So there's a number of key questions, I think, that you should be asking yourself around this again. So again, to revisit, who's successfully applying for promotion. And if the answer is just it's predominantly men, then that really is highly likely to be one of the main causes of your gender pay gap. And again, speak to employees. The other areas you can look at will be the appraisal process, actually, which does have an impact on promotion rates. So it's really important to develop a standardized and a structured appraisals process. Again, in the same way as maybe developing your structured interview process, which will have a twofold positive impact. First of all, it will empower managers to identify talent, wherever that talent may lie, and it will also empower employees to feel that they can go for promotion, which will, ultimately decrease the diversity of your shortlist and improve the situation for all employees across the business. And again, including multiple women in shortlists for promotion is another action that has been proven to be effective at reducing the gender pay gap, and that comes from the behavioural insights guidance that GEO and Behavioural Insights team released recently. Chloe, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's really interesting. Sometimes employers ask us, well, women are not applying for promotion, or so it's kind of women's fault if they don't get promoted. And I think what's really interesting is we conducted a survey about 4 years ago called Project 28 to 40, where we interviewed thousands of women. And what was interesting is women said they were very ambitious, really likely to want to be promoted and lead a team. The problem is the system is not always working for women. So I think we really need to encourage employers to think about why would women not want to apply if they're not applying, but also is there anything in the system that we can change so that they're more likely to do it. So I just wanted to add this, and also looking at project allocation, just to give an example of a way in which you can remove bias. There is a firm with whom we've been working that has implemented a software, an allocation software, so that basically employees can enter the information that, for instance, their skills, what they're interested in, and instead of having a partner giving them work, because we know male partners are more likely to give work to male associates, for instance, it will be the software doing it. So it's a very unbiased way of allocating work, and by doing this, women are more likely to get interesting work that will give them opportunities for the future. So that's just one way in which you can use artificial intelligence, for instance, to remove bias in the process.
That sounds really interesting, actually, Chloe, about the software package. I'd like to find out a bit more about that. I think another point to mention is transparency as well, actually. Encouraging and almost mandating transparency in the promotion process and being transparent about what skills and aptitudes employees need to work through the pay bands is really important and really will encourage more women to seek promotion and to apply for promotion. And that then leads into the point on training and development. I think that's often something that's overlooked, particularly for part-time workers. They may not have the same access to training as full-time workers. Sometimes companies pro-rata this, which it's important that everyone gets the same training and development opportunities. And also, when is training available? Is it all day? Does it fit in with flexible working that you may have? Is that why people aren't accessing it? So think about, are there ways to make training more accessible? Can it be broken down? Can it be done in-house? Employees who are keen for promotion might consider doing their own level of training in their spare time, but ask those questions. And I think also some companies need to consider, do they pay employees for time out of work to go on training? Because this can have a major impact on employees, particularly at the lower levels of your organisation. So I think the key is there are creative options that exist out there to look at who's been promoted, but you need to find out the information first. So I think the next question we wanted to look at was the policies that you have in place to support flexible working. I'll hand you over to Chloe for this one.
Yes, absolutely. So it's really important that women and men are able to work flexibly if they want to. And there was a really interesting report by Tamwise published in 2017 that showed that the employee demand for flexible working was at 87%, but still employers are not making this part of their DNA, which is a real pity, because we know that men and women want flexible working more. So just to give you an example, most of the jobs that are advertised flexibly tend to be low paid. So the proportion of quality job, which is defined as being paid over 20K, are advertised which are advertised with flexible working option is only at 11.1%. So only 11% of quality jobs, you could say, are advertised flexibly. And just putting this one sentence saying that the job is open to flexible working, or that the company is willing to discuss that with the employee, can have a huge impact on the number of women you attract to your organization. So really, I would encourage all employers to do this. This is such an easy thing to do, but also really to explore the different types of flexible working. So often when we talk about flexible working, we think part-time working or working from home, but actually there are many ways in which employees can work flexibly. And unfortunately, it's not explored enough, and companies are not trying enough sometimes to make other types of flexible working work. And we know that they can be very, very powerful. Just to give an example, Deloitte has a really interesting system where you can request, I think it's about a month of unpaid leave to do whatever you want. This is a really good example where you could use that to care for a relative or care for your children, or even study or run a marathon. And that kind of flexibility will really help retain your best talent. So I would really, really encourage employers to have a look at this. Our Equalities report has found that 84% of men with caring responsibility feel that it's important to be able to work flexibly, but only 59% of them are able to do that. So I think there is a real demand from both men and women to work flexibly. Problem is often men are being turned down, or their requests for flexible working are being turned down. And I think that's really discouraging. And if flexible working keeps being seen as a mummy track and is not for everyone, we are really going to have trouble keeping our people and our best people, and for employers to retain the best talents.
I think the next question we have is an important question to ask, but I think it's also important to think about this in the context of the pipeline. So who's coming up through your business for sustainability purposes, really. Lots of companies have taken action to recruit women into senior roles, straight into senior roles, and it's positive. It's really positive. But it's important to make sure that this is sustainable within your business over time. So I would urge you to look at the pipeline. Do you have processes in place to identify talent for succession planning? And what we talked about, appraisals and promotion rates, will assist with that. And it's really important that the early pipeline is strong enough to make the change happen naturally in the future, or to continue to support any actions and initiatives that you've put in place to change this picture in the short term. And again, all the questions that we talked about will have an impact on this going forward. Just some interesting figures for women in senior roles. I mean, we've mentioned before, there are much quoted figures that show that companies with diverse leadership show increased profitability and increased ability to sustain those profits over time. And why would that be? I mean, clearly diversity of thought, ideas and creativity, better role models through the business to increase progression opportunities, better employee satisfaction, better productivity. These will all have a positive impact on productivity. Chloe, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so moving on to the next question. I think this is a very important question. Maybe we should have put it first. How are you evaluating and measuring your progress? With the gender pay gap reporting, a lot of employees are going to look at your gender pay gap as it decreased, as it increased. It's very important that you are measuring this. And at Business in the Community, we've got a benchmark to encourage employers to use that and look at the data that they have. But as I said, it shouldn't just be quantitative. It shouldn't just be data. Talking to your employees can be so important and so insightful to help you understand what's going on. And often this is through talking to people that you uncover the sort of the practicalities of what's not working and how it can be addressed. And something we like to do when we conduct focus group is ask a very simple question. What can your employer do to help you as an employee? What can your line manager do? What can you do? Or what can your networks do? And I think by gathering these insights from your employees, there is a lot you can do. And it also shows to your employees that you care and that you want to do something and listen to them and address their concerns. And really, you can't fix what you can't measure. So measuring is really, really important. Moving on to the next question, maybe what's really interesting as well is to think about other pay gaps. So you may have heard the announcement around the pay gap by ethnicity, which looks at what white employees would do versus other employees, BME employees, for instance, but also looking at the different ethnicities. But something that not many, actually no employers, to my knowledge, has looked at is a gender pay gap by ethnicity. So I mentioned that BAME women may experience a bigger disadvantage in the workplace. For instance, the Fawcett Society published a report last year looking at the different kinds of groups and the fact that, for instance, Black women were earning less than white men and white women. So I think it's really important to be very curious about the data and play with it and try to understand which groups of women in your business are going to be more disadvantaged or are struggling more, whether it's for promotion, recruitment, but also looking at the pay. So to give you an example, we know that the gender pay gap increases by age and that women who are older are likely to face a greater gender pay gap. So looking at this data can really give you an idea of where the pay gap is in your organization. It's not just all women, but certain types of women will be most affected. And I would really love for employers to be a bit bolder and more transparent and come up with this data, because it will really give you really interesting insights. When we conducted our research on what employees think about the gender pay gap, 9 in 10 employees wanted to see the gender pay gap by grade or job level, because that makes more sense to them than the quartile distribution. So I would really encourage employers as well to publish this gender pay gap by grade, because your employees will be very grateful, and it will give you also a lot of information around where the inequality may be in your organization. Also calculating by working pattern to see how your part-time female employees doing compared to your full-time male employees, for instance, could be really insightful. So really encouraging you to play around with the pay gaps and look at different types of pay gap, because that will give you a lot of data that you can use. Whether you decide to publish it or not is another question, and I would encourage you to calculate it even though you don't publish it, so that you can gather the data year over year. And of course, I would want more employers to publish this data, but at least calculate it, because you have it and you know where the inequalities are greater.
Thank you, Chloe. That was really informative on the other pay gaps. And I guess with a Government Equalities Office, we are focused very much on the gender pay gap, but there are other departments here currently consulting on the ethnicity pay gap, as I'm sure you'll have seen in the media, and some information will come out about that over the coming months, I hope and imagine. Just looking at time, we're very close to our time here, and some of the earlier questions that we've had, I feel that we've already answered through the end of the presentation. Chloe is going to cover some areas that you can look to for guidance now, which I think is really useful. So what we will do is we will collate the questions and we'll put together an FAQ, which we will send to everyone. So I think that'll be really useful to everyone, and it'll probably have more detailed and more in-depth answers than what we can give in the remaining couple of minutes today. So I'll pass you back to Chloe, who'll talk about a little bit about guidance.
Yes, so I would really encourage employers to look at the very good ICAS guidance when it comes to calculating the pay gap. Also, if you want more information, you can contact me. I've got my email at the end of the presentation, or just go on our website, Gender BITC, on Google. You can find us easily. We have a lot of case studies on the website which are free, which you can access. But if you want to access more resources, we've got some member-only Gender Pay Gap Toolkits. So, for instance, around understanding your pay gap, communicating your pay gap, or tackling the pay gap. And we also have an advisory service. So if you become a partner of business in the community, a diversity advisor will work with you to set your strategy and help you with any kind of issues you have. You also get access to our diversity benchmark and all sorts of events such as peer learning forums and workshops that can help you. I would really encourage you to look at our latest report, Equalities, which gives you a lot of information and recommendation, and it's free and accessible, around how you can address the pay gap by getting men more involved at home and getting women more involved at work if they wish to. So do have a look at this. There are things you can do even though you don't have much budget, such as publishing your parental leave policies and being more transparent. I would also encourage you to apply for our Times Top 50 Employers for Women list. And this is the list we publish every year to basically show women which organization they should be working for. It's free to enter. You can email timestop50@bitc.org.uk. We'll send you a login and a password, and you can then basically submit your application online. It's only one application, but you can, by applying for the Times Top 50, will also be considered for the Gender Equality Awards. And again, if you want to have a look on our website for the case studies of the previous awards, you'll find a lot of interesting examples of what you can do to promote women in your organization and close your pay gap. So do have a look at this as well. And I couldn't stress more the fact that it's such a brilliant way of attracting women if you do make the list. There are over 1.5 million daily readers for the Times across print and digital. So it's a fantastic way of showcasing what you are doing around the gender pay gap. And actually, we have a question as well on gender pay gap. So I really encourage all employers who are listening to us today to apply. The application process is open until the 22nd of November. So that's it for us today. We really look forward to having your questions, and we will be sending an FAQ at the end of the session as well to make sure that we are answering all your questions. And I really look forward to having you in the forthcoming webinars as well.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you so much for all the information you've shared with us today. Just to add, our next webinar with business in the community, a link to the registration page for that will be coming out in the follow-up email. It's on the 6th of November, and we will be looking at how you can change your recruitment processes to attract a more diverse range of employees and candidates. Thank you, everyone. I hope you find today really useful. Bye.